Hey, welcome back to the Sunday Serving Channel, the place for gospel hope and truth and inspiration. So last week we turned to the Old Testament. I'd like to do that, keep that theme going. There's a wonderful, one of my favorite stories from the Old Testament, I think is so appropriate for today, is the deliverance, the salvation of the people of Israel from Egypt. Exodus 14, the story of crossing the Red Sea, being led by God across the Red Sea, being delivered from the hands of Pharaoh and his chariots. And let's read it. There's a lot to cover here. Probably read the whole chapter, talk about it a little bit. What does it mean today? So here we are, Exodus chapter 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-zephon. You shall encamp facing by the sea." Facing it. So they were leading them away from Pharaoh and from their slave holders, right? Running away. And he leads them towards the sea to camp by it. For Pharaoh will say to the people of Israel, "They are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and his host, and all the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." And they did so. So God had this plan. I think that's the first lesson. God has a plan. He has a plan for each of us. He's a plan for your deliverance, for my deliverance, for if we trust God. Do we trust God and His plans, even if they don't really make sense to us? So in this case, it might not have made sense to the Israelites to go towards the sea where there's no escape, knowing that Pharaoh might come after them, but they listened. Moses told them the story and they listened, and God had a plan. Part of that plan was to harden the heart of Pharaoh, was to have enemies pursue them. It was a test. Do we really trust God? Let's go on here. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of the Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, "What is this we've done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" So remember the plagues, right? Moses and Aaron, they sent the plagues, and Pharaoh relented and let them go. And you'd think they'd learned their lesson there, that God is mighty, but no. His heart was hardened again. He thought he could rebel against God. So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. I love that. The people of Israel were going out defiantly. It's good, to be defiant, to rebel, often can get you in trouble. But if you're defiant against evil, if you're defiant against bad, that kind of defiance is good. So here they were trusting God. They were going out defiantly against their enemies. The Egyptians pursued them, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, and encamped at the sea by Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. So that's kind of setting the stage. You can imagine it. They're camped by the sea. Pharaoh's coming out with his soldiers. Doesn't talk about them being scared yet. Well, it's coming. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done? What have you done to us to bring us out of the land of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So, wow. So all of a sudden, things change. Tide turns. Doesn't look so good for us, for the Israelites here. And they grumble. They cry out to the Lord. Well, it's good they cry out to the Lord. That's wonderful. But what sense do we cry out to the Lord? Are we crying out to the Lord in trust? Please help us. And then listening to what He wants? Or are we going to grumble? I kind of like this line here, right? Aren't there enough graves in Egypt? I mean, they'd probably been working on the pyramids and stuff. They knew all about the graves in Egypt that were there. So they were kind of using a little sarcasm there. but they were grumbling. Moses said to the people, and I love this, here's the message: fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. Now that line that Moses said to the people of Israel, that's the message here. That's the message that I should consider any time that we are fearful, that we're being pursued by, what are those enemies? Right? The enemies around us in our culture, society that we don't like, the erosion of family, the erosion of goodness, drugs, alcohol, addictions, whatever it is. Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. So there it is. So the enemy, the wrong, the evil, the destruction, the decay of the world, that's what God is saying. Don't be scared. Stand firm. Listen to me. Those enemies you will never see again, if you have the courage to follow me, to listen. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Isn't that a beautiful line? The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. Other translation, it says, be still. Okay, so often when we're scared, we what do? Right? Sometimes we freeze. Sometimes we are in a frenzy. We start running. We start doing things. We need to stop. We need to listen to God. And then there's a time for action when he directs us. But in this case, he was saying, stand still, be silent, listen to God, I will fight for you. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Isn't that great? So God had a plan. Forward. Forward where? Well, the sea was in front of them. They didn't know that sea would open up for them. But I love this line here, tell the people of Israel to go forward. And I think that's important today. Are we helpless? If we don't like what we see around us, what should we do? And the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to go forward. We know that direction, towards God, towards obedience, towards love, towards forgiveness, towards the kingdom. Going forward, together. Lift up your staff, God said, and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea onto dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all of his hosts, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over the Pharaoh, his chariots and the horsemen. So the point was to show the glory, the strength of God to everybody, even to the enemy. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night, without one coming near the other all night. So isn't that awesome? So God set his presence, right? His strength, his glory, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that led the people, his direction that he wanted. Well, here, that same cloud, the glory of God is going behind them to protect them from their enemy, to confuse the enemy, to give this shield. And how often does that happen? We don't realize it, but God's glory can be used any way he chooses. It can protect us from our enemy from behind, and we don't even see, we don't realize the glory of God, what it's all doing for us. And here's the case that happened with the Israelites. Of course, the story goes on, right? Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. So this miracle happened. God, it says here, he used nature, right? The strong wind from the east blew all night. It's amazing what winds can do blowing all night. We know that. The power of nature. And this pathway, whatever it was, peninsula that was widened, who knows? By the act of God, this pathway was made for them across the sea to deliverance, away from their enemy. And of course, I maybe won't read the whole chapter, but they crossed over on dry land. They turned around. They saw the Egyptians following them. And God again intervened with his glory and his power against the enemy, confused them, made the wheels of the chariot fall off. They got stuck in the mud, okay, because they were a lot heavier than the people of Israel were walking. And then God told Moses to stretch his hand out over the water again, and the waters closed over the enemy, and they were gone. forever, destroyed. And then this chapter ends, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore." Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, so that the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. And that's the point. So this amazing deed that God did, this act of deliverance, was to show the glory of God to them, to the people of Israel, to us, to the believers, and also to the enemies, that God is mighty, that God is almighty, that he can make anything happen. We better watch out. We better not go against God, or we'll be like those Egyptian soldiers, in the mud with water crashing over our heads. And that was the defining moment for the people of Israel at that time. They trusted God, and he told them to go forward. And as long as they went forward in trust, and they believed that God had a way, they believed and they followed and they were obedient, things went well. We know the story goes on, right? In the 40 years, sometimes they lost that faith. They lost their courage, their boldness, and they went backwards. And what happened? It didn't work out so well. So the same thing is today. Go forward. God is saying go forward in faith, whatever it is, against any enemy, to follow God's plan, to be bold, to have courage, to believe, to speak out the truth. And victory, his kingdom, his reign will be forever. That's what they sang to celebrate that instance. God will reign forever and ever. It's true. It will happen. So have courage. Go forward like the people of Israel, with boldness, with faith. Never fear. God has victory over all enemies. God bless you. Have a wonderful week. We're going to go over this peninsula here in the rain and see what happens. Come on, Remy.